Ray Dalio is an American investor, and until his book, The Changing World Order: Why Nations Succeed and Fail, hardly anyone outside of the world of finance and business knew his name. In the book, he examines history's most turbulent economic and political periods to see why times ahead will probably be very different than those we've experienced in our own lifetimes. He outlines political and economic conditions he's never seen in his 50-year career, the significant wealth, political, and value divisions within countries, challengers to the current world's reserve currency, and the potential for conflict between rising world powers versus the existing one, the United States. With each great empire in history, he's pointed out 3 separate cycles for the nation. The rise is a period of building and prosperity and peace that comes after a new order is established. It begins when there is increasing stability and order. Eventually, a strong and capable leadership system emerges after the chaotic decline of the previous order. This new system begins to rebuild and consolidate the wealth and power of the nation. Innovation and education are highly prized and encouraged. An emphasis on physical development and martial skills goes hand in hand with the society's examples of good moral order, civility, and work ethic. New technology or greater regional influence is developed because of the government, the people, and the military working in tandem to achieve a goal. The more productive the nation, the greater the share of influence around the world through cultural and material exports. This increase in global influence is a cycle. More trade and productivity lead to a wealthier nation that invests in infrastructure, education, and expansion. The more foreign interests a nation has, the more it invests in protecting its trade routes and resources outside of its own borders. This leads to expanding military strength. The increased wealth from establishing different sources of revenue, especially lending services and bonds, allows people to convert their savings into investments to fund projects that benefit everybody. All of the greatest empires became the leading financial center of the known world because of their economic and military power, eventually becoming the world's reserve currency. Inevitably, the country ends up at the top of the world hierarchy. Success after success can't be sustained forever. Ironically, no country can see when it's at the true peak, because the sustained success becomes the norm. This period of high success is when the beginnings of decline are actually formed. The hard-working habits and cycle of sacrifice, goodwill, and cooperation that propelled the nation to the top eventually break down as people become comfortable with their positions. Even the poorest members of the population do much better than their counterparts in the less fortunate nations. The average person earns more, leading businesses and other countries to look for a workforce that's willing to work for less. Other countries simultaneously emulate the methods and copy innovations of the current world power, which further reduces the leading country's dominance. The period of wealth and prosperity also affects the culture and desires of the people. As wealth increases, so does the standard of living and expectations. More leisure is enjoyed. Instead of being stuck in a survival mindset, the people are free to pursue the finer and less productive pursuits in life. In extreme cases, a life of pure decadence with no other reward for society is seen as a virtue. This creates over time a generation so far removed from strife and steeped in leisure that they become vulnerable to the challenges posed by the world. Most of the population at this stage isn't interested in expansion as much as they are at ensuring that the good times continue. Financial bubbles happen because the people start to fund their lifestyles through borrowed money. The stratification of society becomes increasingly solidified with a growing wealth gap due to wealthier people being able to pursue self-interested projects. This wealthy class also has access to a different educational tier that focuses more on connection building, further exacerbating the problem. The additional wealth is used to influence political policy in their favor, and because of this, resentment begins to set in at a national level. Nepotism and corruption play a role in maintaining families' personal wealth and influence, as the desire to move in the direction that benefits the nation becomes increasingly more self-centered. However, if the standard of living continues to improve and entertainment distractions continue to dominate the cultural sphere, these general resentments don't turn into outright conflict. Over a long enough period, the nation begins borrowing and spending excessively. foreign-held debt begins to reach extremely high amounts, leading to concerns that the debt may not actually be paid back. This borrowing may enable a country to boost its spending power, but slowly and steadily, it weakens the currency over the long term. The borrowing sustains the country's ability to live beyond its natural means, fueling domestic overconsumption, increasing lack of productivity, and financing a military used to secure the interests outside of the borders. The costs of keeping this machine going means that eventually the empire this nation created becomes unsustainable and unprofitable. Richer countries continue to borrow from poor countries until the formerly poor country now has enough stored wealth to begin dictating terms that make trade more profitable to themselves. If these poor countries select another currency of their own to facilitate trade and the former reserve currency begins to phase out of favor, the empire begins to fall. The decline can be stated with the simple adage of what goes up must come down. Conflict and catastrophic events dominate this phase of a nation's lifespan as the dominant world empire. Internally, defaulting on debt and inflation are increasingly seen as the only option. However, history shows that nearly every nation chooses to print more new money rather than calling it quits entirely. Devalued currency and inflation mean that prices of goods and services become more expensive on a consistent and rapid pace. Prices can literally double overnight while lots of people find they're still being paid the same. There would be no distinction in left or right in terms of extremes. Both sides will blame different sections of the elite members of the society as the main culprit for the empire's issues. Taxes on the wealthiest people continue to rise, leading them to spread their money in other places, assets, and currencies that seem to be a more stable option. This craters the tax system in place, as the wealthiest people on a percentage basis pay out the bulk of a country's tax revenue. Interesting to note that even if you confiscated all of the actual wealth of billionaires today, in the United States, it would only run the US government for 8 months. If the outflow of wealth begins to threaten the empire's survival, it becomes outlawed, and those who are attempting to flee begin to panic. Productivity is undermined and anarchy and discontent begin to set in, first in small pockets, then in larger scale. This is the most likely time a populist leader who's seen as someone who can bring order to chaos is sought out. If a social conflict continues, it leads to a revolution or civil war, and big changes in terms of government and concentrations of wealth and power happen. These can be peaceful, and the institutions of the old order can be preserved under new leadership. But historically, it's more violent and changes the old order completely. When internal changes and instability coincide with external issues, the entire world order can change. Thucydides' trap refers to the natural and inevitable conflict that arises when a rising power challenges the dominant old one. International conflict is possible if the new power has built up a military that can stand up to the current empire's military forces. It will almost always take advantage of the current civil weaknesses and issues. Simultaneously, an empire defending its borders and its interests put it in a vulnerable cycle of continually creating more money to finance its military while keeping its own economy afloat. Random tests of power are initiated by weaker countries, since at this stage there isn't a true viable system of peacefully resolving the issue. New alliances would be formed at this time. Wars are costly for all nations involved, but they also have historically settled the final score on the world stage to signal who the boss is. The world will either see the current empire renewed and re-strengthened through the conflicts it's faced and succeeded over, with more strength built on the foundations of the old one, or a completely new one will be in its place as the dominant world order, changing the balance of power in the world. Recently, a figure from the past has also gained renewed attention, even among younger people, due to references in popular culture.
And you have precious little time to save yourself.